Hey guys, welcome back. So now man, getting into Absolute Carnage Weapons Plus, which is probably my most anticipated tie-in as far as seeing how Weapon H pairs up with the new and improved Cletus Cassidy. And I'm gonna go ahead and say it now, like Clay Cortez did not disappoint. But even dare I say with this issue, I'm a bit more excited with a lot of the things happening in the background with how much closer the symbiotes are being tied into Weapon X in Marvel history overall. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so at this point in time, in relation to everything else we've been talking about with Absolute Carnage, we yet again take a step back from the main series to where we've already seen Carnage collect a sufficient amount of codices, and we go from there and scale back to the hunt to where he's actually collecting them, which is one of the things I really appreciate about the tie-ins, even though they may come out after certain things happen in the main event. But even with doing so, it doesn't make them any less exciting, especially with us knowing that Carnage had collected codices from different Ghost Riders, which were some of the main people who I was kind of like, how? Like, I don't want a quick insert in the main story. I would much rather a tie-in to slow this down and explain this to me. And that's exactly how we fall into Absolute Carnage with Weapons Plus. Because when we hop into this unmarked facility in a classified location, all of a sudden on the screen we see something saying Weapon 5 incident footage, and this guy who's in the chair is watching this video over and over again, which pretty much looked like a bunch of soldiers who was made of spaghetti got introduced to a really hungry baby. And dear YouTube, that was as PG kid safe as I could put that. But essentially Carnage came looking for spines. A few people got away, but a couple people didn't, and it's almost like much of what we're seeing is like different clips from different body cams, which are not from Weapon 5, because him and the Mars team are pretty much reportedly in the wind, because as soon as they heard fall back, that was all the detail they needed. But the footage from those who didn't make it out, that footage made its way back to Weapons Plus. And so now from here, jumping over to Clay Cortez, who is still in between homes once again, and mainly because of the way that things went down within Hulk Vereen's, because at that time he was fresh out of making millions from Dario Agger, to where if I remember correctly it was somewhere around like $10 million. And it was in Hulk Vereen's where we had seen that he had bought a nice house for his family, he spared no expense on security, and he also had built an underwater base that doubled as a base of operations but also as a safe house for his wife and children to run to. And you know, low-key just thinking about all the stuff that he bought, like he might be broke again. I don't know, but it's comic book money, so we'll see. But when Clay gets back to his cabin, he's met there by his old team from Eagle Star, who are holding his mother-in-law hostage because they want him to join with them and do one last job. And so now for anybody who's new to Weapon H, this is the same team that Clay Cortez had turned on when he refused to slaughter a village, which in turn left Clay fatally injured. But rather than leaving him to die, they went ahead and just sold him to William Stryker, who at the time had hired Dr. Alba, who specifically chose Clay to become Weapon H. And so now if you need to get caught up on like everything from day one, either from Weapons of Mutant Destruction or all the way through the Weapon H solo series, I got it all in the description because they've been planting a lot of seeds with this guy. And like I said before, like you just never know when certain things are gonna pop back up. And speaking of things popping back up, like I don't know why Clay keeps coming back to this cabin, because anytime he does, somebody looking for him comes and finds him here. And so now when Clay turns down Urquhart, who's the leader of his old Eagle Star team and the same guy that sold Clay to William Stryker, which was like one of our first signs that Weapons Plus was back active again at some capacity, he then tells Clay that they've got to work together because they're pretty much family, with Weapons Plus being their common grandfather and Clay being Weapon H and Urquhart being Weapons 5. Because before Weapons Plus, when there was Project Rebirth, which had created Captain America, the first successful super soldier, within Project Rebirth he was supposed to be the first of many. But through the years that he went on ice and he was missing, that gap in time, which started from the mid-40s, it started a race for a number of different countries to do their best and make their attempt at recreating the success of Project Rebirth. But after Cap's disappearance, all over the world, different companies were pouring out billions of dollars in their attempts to recreate the super soldier. And this led to things like Moscow, Russia starting Department X, but this race to have the next super soldier is also what birthed Weapons Plus, which then went up through your number scheme, which eventually gave us Wolverine, who was Weapon X number 10. But long before that you had Weapon 2, which had arguably gave them the blueprint for Weapon X, because immediately after Captain America they were testing on animals. And I gotta say, like I was looking at some old photos and well, you guys get it. But one of the things that we come to find out within your Weapon Plus series is actually a bit more about some of the other successes and what actually led to Urquhart becoming Weapons 5. Because in 1965, when the Grendel was discovered frozen in ice, this one scared the mess out of them just thinking of the idea of where this thing came from, but their studies of it then sparked the implementation for Weapons Plus to bond samples of it with wounded soldiers from Vietnam, which is something that the Weapon Plus series has been tying together with Flash Thompson and your Doverton team from Carnage USA, which at the time was called like your Mercury team, I believe it was, with each of its members using a portion of the hybrid symbiote. And so now with Dr. Andrew Breen, to whom with every time we see him he's always using these eye drops. But on their way to the site where they plan to draw out Cletus Cassidy, he explains all of these things to Clay and his mother-in-law Janice, that the Grendel which escaped a couple months ago was connected to something much larger, something with immeasurable power that is not from this world. And although this greater threat is coming, this coming is being made possible through all this slaughter that Carnage has been doing, which we're seeing once again is actually the true fulfillment of Carnage becoming the Red Messiah. Because if you guys remember back when we talked about Cult of Carnage as part of the Absolute Carnage playlist, we had seen a lot of things pointing towards Jerry Conway's Carnage Volume 3 when we had seen the prophecy of Carnage becoming the Red Messiah, which was part of the reason why even before Knull, Carnage had certain abilities that other symbiotes didn't. And even back then before Donny Cates' run on Venom, and this was like back in 2016 or 2017, but even during this time when we had seen the temple which was dedicated to your Red Messiah / Red Slayer, this is where we first actually seen the swirly lines which were all around the structure of the temple. But after the recent events in Venom, which brought us into Absolute Carnage, we now realize that these symbols actually connect all the way back to Knull. And so now when Dr. Andrew Breen arrives with them to the site where they plan to trap Carnage, the way that they plan to do this is actually pretty crazy because they have this container / device to where inside of it is sustaining the life of a clone brain of one of the Project Plus members who has been bonded with a symbiote. And what this device does, it actually blocks a signal from this brain and the other remains, which have been genetically modified to call out to Carnage like crazy. And Urquhart just shoots it, which pretty much just sets off Cletus Cassidy to come after them and not really caring whether it's a trap or not, because he knows good and well like when he gets there they're not going to be able to stop him. And because of this he just heads over there without really a care in the world. And to make his entrance he takes this mega bus and heads straight over there, sending it heading directly at Clay, which really isn't a problem for Clay because he can handle getting hit by a bus. But it's also this whole situation of Clay being on the front line is mainly because he's their big gun. And it really points back to one of the things that Urquhart had mentioned just before he shot the canister and set this whole thing off. Like Clay asked him, if you guys got all these fire weapons and these sound weapons which you say will take out a symbiote, like why didn't you use that a couple days ago? And he told Clay like first reason that was a surprise attack, but this time it's different because we have a Hulk. And ironically enough they find out pretty quick that the fire and the sound thing ain't gonna do it, because as soon as Uruguay blows up the bus, Carnage just waltzes out, and now the only thing standing between them and Carnage is now Weapon H, who was like their last resort because nothing else they have in their armory can stand a chance against the Red Messiah. But I gotta say, as far as just Weapon H versus Carnage, and I almost want to call him Carnage Plus because he's far from regular right now, but as far as these two facing off with each other, and it makes me think of the battle between Carnage and the Immortal Hulk, and more specifically the reasoning to why what Carnage used on the Immortal Hulk won't work with Weapon H, or at least not as easily, because if Weapon H had been a symbiote or had a codices, it truly would have been a problem, because then Carnage would have to drill through an adamantium skull or run into the snag of having to look up online like how to rip out an adamantium spine. And perhaps he could like drill through the eye, and that was like one of the methods that Dario Agger had initially thought of, but even still, getting that spine would have been a problem. But with Carnage pretty much getting nowhere with Weapon H, he then gets back to business and goes after Urquhart. But just before he gets him, and he only has time to really snatch up the bait, but just before he gets to him, he's snatched up and taken through the roof by Weapon H. And to me this is like a visual representation of what I think of whenever somebody says they jumping out the gym. But essentially with Weapon H doing this, he's trying to see what Carnage can take, with hopes that this suplex from 200 feet would work out. But as soon as they land, like Urquhart and the others, they just torch the whole pit, which does piss off Clay, but even still they do this because these dudes are scared. But it's also here that we discover that Dr. Andrew Breen, who has also carved the symbol in his chest, that he's been making use of these eye drops so that he could see through the eyes of the Grendel, which prior to this point was like the missing element in all of his research. But when Clay sees him and not Janice, he's then worried about her well-being. But Dr. Breen, with his new insight, he just let her go, and he told Clay that his work is done, but as for himself and the others, it's their purpose to stay here and die. And this is where Weapon H goes straight up SpongeBob on him. He's like, I bet I'm out. And just like that, their only chance of living is gone. Like their only chance of protection, of viable protection, has just walked out. And to me, like that was one of the funniest things, just mainly with Carnage versus Weapon H, because even earlier it came to a point where like Carnage was like, okay, well, we're getting nowhere, I'm actually here for a reason, and Weapon H is pretty much like, you know what, I really don't want to protect these dudes, no way, I don't even like them, and he just walks out on them. Like it's perfect. Because really, Clay's only concern is his mother-in-law. As long as she's safe, then he don't have to go home and feel the wrath of Sonya, his wife. But I do gotta admit though, like after all this time and just the relationship between Clay and his mother-in-law, who never really liked him, and mainly because he would be gone for so long, whether it being on a mission or something, and because of that, Janice would have to watch the kids for Sonya, and that just added fuel to the fire of her just not liking him. And I really like that this tie-in served the additional purpose with bringing a shift to that dynamic. And so now when we get back to Weapons Plus, where we see the director who we had seen in the beginning, Professor Junger, who's talking to a guy who's archiving and showing him the data, and he mentions that they're keeping both the data from Dr. Breen's eye drops, and they're also working on replicating the device he used to block Carnage from finding the bait until they were ready. But also with that, with the director drinking from this mug that has like your Captain America Funko Pop, which I feel like is a super subtle like John Sublime reference that may or may not pan out throughout Weapons Plus, but trust me, if it gains any steam, I'm doing a video on it, especially with the addition of Weapons Plus being on Weapons 30. Like they've been plussing it up this whole time. But another significant Captain America thing to keep in mind is that in addition to that, like with Clay Cortez, and we talked about this before so I won't spend too much time on it, but just keep in mind with Clay Cortez, to whom for his entire life he's been standing up for other people, and mainly because from a young age he knew what it was like to have nobody stand up for him. But because he had been such a huge fan of Captain America, this is what eventually caused him to enlist and sign up for the military years before he even got involved with Eagle Star. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.